Man enters a lion's territory after years apart, and what happens surprises everyone. The first thing he noticed was the sound the grass made under his boots. Years ago, when Jonah Reed walked this same valley as a young field biologist, he had moved with the heedless stride of someone convinced the land would forgive him. Now each step through the tawny stems seemed to announce him. Soft whisk-whisk of seed heads brushing denim, the faint crunch where the earth had baked hard. The morning heat was already lifting off the flats, and a shimmer quivered along the line where the savanna tilted up to meet the pale sky. At his back came the quiet creak of the vehicle cooling as the sun climbed and the engine ticked itself to silence. "Wind's wrong, but only just," said Naledi from behind the bonnet. She was the senior guide here now, lean and steady, a woman whose soft voice could stall an excited tourist in mid-squeal. "It's going across your left shoulder. If he's nearby, he'll get you before he gets the car." "I want him to know I'm here," Jonah said. He kept his voice even, the same practical tone he used with the undergrads who came to the reserve in khaki and new boots. "No surprises." Naledi glanced down at the handheld radio. "We'll walk with you to the ridge and no farther. If he comes quick, we go back in. Don't be stubborn." Jonah smiled, though his mouth was dry. "I've never once been stubborn." Kojo snorted from the passenger seat. "You, stubborn, please." The banter steadied him. Beyond them, the grassland spread like an old tablecloth, stained in places where patches of blackened vegetation still sulked after last season's burn, neat where elephant paths had laid silver tracks, and smudged here and there with the shadows of knobthorn acacias. 2 kilometers away, a fan of dark green hinted at the river's course. He had known this place as a series of data points and GPS coordinates once. Today, it was nothing so abstract. Today, he had returned to find one lion. There had been a message waiting the morning he arrived, written in the careful script of the reserve manager. "Jonah, we may have your old mail back." He was seen on the East Flats 3 nights running. Heavy mane, right ear notch, left forepaw scar. He chased the younger coalition across the ridge. Naledi thinks it might be Makombo. You should see for yourself. Makombo. The name, spoken in the low, rounded vowels of the local dialect, meant something like redeemed. Jonah had not chosen it. The Rangers had, on the 5th week after they cut the snare from the cub's leg and ferried him in a crate to the boma that sat just outside the reserve's fence. Jonah had been new then, face still thin, hair still long, the latest graduate with a small grant and a larger faith in controlled experiments. He had supervised the cub's recovery, bottle feeds that gave way to goat carcasses dragged by 3 people into the center of the enclosure, a sample of fresh scat collected each morning, a chart of sunlight, hours against cortisol values. He had kept to the rulebook on habituation, minimal handling, no pet names, no soft talk. And yet memory is sneaky. The cub had limped toward him with its clumsy gravity, all paws and intent eyes, and some part of Jonah's mind had learned the rhythm of that walk, the way one learns the rhythm of a friend's laughter. Years later, when he stopped playing the footage for donors, he could still recite the noise the cub made at dusk, a low, uncertain moan, half complaint and half greeting, as if it were an odd lyric stuck in his head. In the 3rd month, they opened the gate, ran the release protocol, and Makombo left. 2 months later, a pair of young males claimed the flats. By then, Jonah's grant had ended, and he had moved south to teach. The cub, who had been a study subject and then a daily worry, turned into one more line in a report and a blurred shape on camera trap images, crossing the river at the end of the dry season. That had been the last he knew. It was dangerous work to look for one lion on foot, and foolish if you did it with the wrong thrill in your chest. Jonah told himself he had neither thrill nor nostalgia. He had come because Naledi had said the older male had driven off the upstarts, because scars had a certain pattern. because there were still things to learn from an animal who had survived the traps and the floods and the shifting politics of male coalitions. He had come because a rumor can gnaw, and because part of him feared the truth would be simple. Not Macombo, just another weary lion whose face happened to wear the same history. "Ready?" Naledi asked. He nodded, and the three of them set out, Naledi, Kojo with the rifle slung but uncapped, and Jonah a step ahead, but not so far that it could be mistaken for bravado. Their pace was unhurried. They walked as researchers are taught to walk in places where the wrong movement pulls a trigger, neither mechanical nor merciful, alert, headings planned, eyes pausing on the way each acacia branch broke the horizon, as if it might be the curve of a shoulder, the notch of an ear. Every 100 meters or so, Jonah spoke in a voice pitched halfway between conversation and announcement. "Coming through," he said. "We're here." The phrases were meaningless in English and meaningful in intention. They marked him as person and not prey. He reached the ridge a few minutes ahead of the others and stilled so they could close the distance to him. Below, the valley opened, and the long grasses lay in smooth drifts broken by termite mounds. He tasted dust. He tasted the metallic tingle that rises when the body has not yet decided if it is in danger. Naledi joined him, scanning. Kojo turned once, checking their back trail. The wind stroked Jonah's ear and then wandered off, faint and fickle. He saw the prints first, 4 pads and the suggestion of a 5th, where claw tips had pressed like the memory of an impulse. Fresh, the edges still crisp. Panic, the thin bird that always lives in the chest at moments like this, lifted its head. Jonah pressed his breath outward until it settled. They were not on a game drive with 20 meters of steel and open-air laughter wrapped around them. They were 3 on foot. They had come because they meant to come, and because walking in a place on its own terms is sometimes the only honest way to talk to it. "Here," he said softly. Naledi crouched, rubbed a knuckle along the edge of one print. She angled her hand above it to test the shadow drop and judged time by how much the sun had softened the rim. "Half an hour, maybe less," she murmured. Kojo lifted the binoculars, and Jonah watched his face, not the glass. How a person looked when they found what they were searching for meant as much as the finding. Kojo's mouth dissolved into a line he reserved for snakes and strangers. He lowered the lenses and nodded toward a mound that rose from the grass about 60 meters out. "Between those 2 stumps," he said, "see the color that isn't grass?" Jonah lifted the binoculars. For a moment all he saw was blur. Then the focus edged in and the shape resolved. Mane like a storm cloud caught on thorns, face a pale plain against the background, eyes half-lidded in the manner of an animal conserving energy until energy was demanded. The lion's chin rested on his forelegs, his ribs did not show. His left forepaw, half wrapped by grass, bore a faint shape. Not a wound, but a memory of one, a slicked area of fur smoothing where it should bristle. Jonah lowered the binoculars and felt his throat work. He had prepared, or told himself he had, to feel nothing scientific enough to discuss. This was not relief, it was not joy. It was a particular kind of recognition that thrummed along the skin, as if a long unplayed instrument had managed a single true note. "That's him," he said. Naledi did not answer right away. She watched the lion instead, and then watched Jonah. "What matters now is not whether it's him," she said. "What matters is what we do about each other." "We back out?" Kojo asked, practical as always. "Not yet," Jonah said, before he could rehearse the thought. "We let him see, and then we see." He started down the slope, slow and square-shouldered, the way the training asked. Stand tall. Keep your steps measured. Do not run. Do not crouch. Do not flare your arms like a foolish bird. Speak in your ordinary voice. He could feel Naledi's attention on his spine as a weight and a promise. He could feel Kojo's rifle as a pressure in the air that pushed against his urge to behave, as if violence were not part of this conversation. At 40 meters, the lion lifted his head without hurry. A fly drifted up from the corner of his eye and returned as if tethered. The mouth fell open, not in a yawn, but in a simple, roomy breathing that did not suggest heat or anxiety. He watched Jonah as he might watch a migrating cloud, present, relevant, but not yet a problem to be solved. Jonah stopped and spoke. A steady murmur that seemed ridiculous to his own ears, but has saved more lives than bravery in Africa's grasslands. "It's me," he said. "It's Jonah. You don't need to stand. I see you." At 30 meters, a wind seam slid across them, a change like the tiny temperature drop in the interval between lightning and thunder. Jonah felt it on his cheek just before the lion did, saw the exact moment the scent reached across and touched the inside of the animal's head. The lion blinked, then made a noise Jonah did not at first name, because naming implies certainty, and he had promised himself none. It was a low, rolling, almost sculpted sound, a contact call that grazed the border between inquiry and assertion. The lion got to his feet very slowly, the way something heavy and comfortable chooses not to hurry. He did not bluff charge. He did not lower his head and propel himself. He stood and stood there, muscles sliding into their working arrangement, tail dangling in a markless line behind him. "Back to the ridge," Naledi whispered. Jonah could hear the calculation in her voice. This was a lion who had held territory. This was not a habituated cat who expected people to toss bony scraps over the fence. She was reading the space for exits, for what cover might be useful if cover became necessary. Jonah did not move at first. He knew the cost of sudden shifts. He kept his feet exactly where they were and shifted only his weight, as if reminding his body of its own hinge points. The lion dropped his head a degree and sniffed. He stepped one pace forward. The grass made that whispering sound like new paper rubbed against itself. It was very quiet now, except for the insect song. Even the river seemed to pause. "I'm going to take a step back," Jonah said, not because the lion needed the information, but because he needed to name it to himself. He took the step. The lion's ears tilted, catching Jonah's voice the way hands cup water. The animal's mouth made small motions, as if washing something difficult to taste off the back of his teeth. He looked bigger than in the footage from years ago, and of course he was. Time had hung a great shag of mane over his shoulders, and every part of him that had once been slender with the overshoot of adolescence was now heavy with use. But the right ear notch was there, a half-moon taken by wire or fight, and when he shifted again, Jonah saw the left forepaw come down with that fractional hesitance that had once told them how deep the snare had cut. "Back," Naledi said again, because it was her job to say it. Jonah took another step. The lion answered with one of his own, matching distance as if agreement were a set of beads. Both had to move along a wire at the same pace. 27 meters, 25. The space between man and cat became a thing with tension in it, like cloth pulled across a frame. Jonah felt his palms dampen. The urge to do something, to kneel and make himself smaller, or to lift his hands as he had seen game scouts do, moved through him and left. The lion shifted again, and the left forepaw showed him that flattened patch of scar-red skin. In a flicker, Jonah saw it again as it had been, the fine metal biting just above the dew claw, the foam on the cub's breath, the way fear makes animals go dutifully quiet, as if they understand that panic is wasteful in places where energy is currency. A stir went through the grass to the left. Naledi's breath touched his shoulder. Kojo had lifted the rifle barrel a few degrees. This was the part where anything foolish could happen, and it was the part Jonah had known he could not simulate in memory, not really. The part where, at a hand's twitch, this could become a story other people told about a former researcher who should have kept the past in the past. He chose to speak again. He did not use the little two-note whistle they had sounded at the boma when they drew the cables to haul in a carcass. That would have been for him an indulgence, and animals do not honor our self-indulgence for long. He used instead the tone he had learned from the older rangers, a cadence that people in this part of the world carry when addressing cattle or children or the early morning, a tone that assumes cooperation will be granted if asked correctly. "Ah," he said. "Ah, old man. Go on, then. Go on." The lion's lips closed over his teeth. He shifted his weight once more, not forward this time, but sideways, as if to give Jonah a clear lane should he wish to take it. Then he rolled the weight back, put his great face down toward the grass, and drew in a long breath through his mouth, grimacing slightly. Phlegmon, the behavior that tells the animal more about what the air is carrying than the air itself admits. He stood like that, open-mouthed, testing information. It was a gesture Jonah had watched 1,000 times and had never felt so intimately included in. He was data to the lion now, a riddle that might hold danger or memory or nothing at all. "Jonah," Naledi said, steadier now. "He's not escalating. We're going to retreat." He nodded, even though she could not see him, and took another step back. The lion matched him with a parallel motion that did not close the distance or widen it. If Jonah had been a different man, a man who believed in signs, he might have called it permission. He took 2 steps, then 3, and the lion's gaze slid past him to the vehicle on the ridge, to the hot, glittering world, to something only lions know how to count. He swished his tail twice, slow and grave, as if to say boredom rather than menace, and then, without drama, without the satisfying theatrics tourists come for, he turned his head away. The moment did not snap. It faded like a sound absorbed by soft walls. Jonah felt his knees again. He felt his feet. He felt relief arrive, not as joy, but as a kind of orderly rearrangement of physiology, heart settling, lungs remembering how to inflate all the way, eyelids blinking at a normal human pace. He did not smile. Smiling was for later, if later came. When they reached the ridge, Jonah let his hands fall against the bonnet and stood like a man who has finally come to the end of a staircase in the dark. Naledi rested the binoculars on the hood and didn't speak for a minute. Kojo recapped the rifle with ritual care and then glanced at Jonah the way you look at someone who has walked back from a place you haven't been. "Was that him?" Kojo asked. Jonah swallowed. "It was... He didn't act like they do when they haven't seen people for a while," Naledi said. "There was a minute there, when the wind shifted, where I thought he recognized something." "Smell's the longest memory," Jonah said. He had not meant to say it like that, as if making a point to a classroom. But there it was. He didn't want to chase. He wanted to know. "And now," Kojo said, "what do you want?" Jonah looked down the slope at the lion, who had settled again, half shaded by the stunted tree. He looked at the thin line of green that marked the river, at the pale scrawl of vulture wings far against the blue. What did he want? He had wanted proof of identity, of survival, of something he couldn't have named when he booked his ticket and packed his old field shirt that still smelled faintly of dust and ethanol and cheap soap. He had gotten some of it. He had not gotten the neat conclusion the internet so loves: embrace or attack, miracle or tragedy. What he had was better for being messier. "I want to see what happens if we walk away," he said. "I want to see whether he follows or forgets." Naledi smiled then, very slightly, the corner of her mouth turning up like the beginning of a plan. "You're learning." "I'm late to it," Jonah admitted. They sat on the bonnet, took water, and watched the lion do the ordinary things lions do when no one is demanding drama of them. He breathed. He swatted lazily at a fly, missed, and did not care. A warthog family trailed along the far edge of the valley, the piglets so perfectly in step behind their mother that they seemed a single elongated animal. The lion watched, and then looked away without moving. It was a day when nothing excessive had to happen. Back at camp, the radio would be busy. The manager would want details. Someone would ask if they might set up a hide over the next week to get better photographs. If the old male had shown any interest in the vehicle, if there were signs of injury. Word would leak, and by sundown every tent will have a story about the researcher who came back to see if the wild remembered him. But for the moment, it was only the three of them, and the heavy heat, and the quiet lion, and the memory of the way his chest had expanded when he first scented them. Jonah felt the steadying weight of time, how it compacts and makes sense of itself not in tidy arcs, but in returns. He pictured the Boma gate rolling back, the cubs stepping out into light that was too large for his eyes, the way the rangers stood with their hands low, not waving, not calling, and let the young animal mark his own distance. He remembered the first night alone out there, when they tracked him with telemetry until the signal smeared into noise near the river, and how he had lain awake on his thin mattress in the small room with the tin roof and told himself to accept what the wild does with what you love. On the ridge, he let himself breathe the way he had told the students to breathe when they confronted their first buffalo on foot. Long out, shorter in, count something simple. He was not 26 anymore. He was not made of that swift, careless certainty that the world will meet your demands if you declare them with enough charm. He was older now, and the lion was old too by the standard of creatures whose lives are measured by wet seasons and injuries and the fit of coalitions. They had met again, not because destiny loves symmetry, but because both had endured long enough for their paths to cross a second time. "Let's go in," Naledi said at last. "He's sleeping." "You're sweating through your shirt," Jonah laughed. "Quiet." "Fine." He glanced back once as they climbed into the vehicle. The lion did not lift his head. He looked like a piece of the land that had grown itself into the shape of an animal so it could watch the day for a while before turning back into plain. On the way to camp, Kojo drove with both hands loose on the wheel. The road rolled under them, a corrugated ribbon of dust and ruts. Jonah felt the story forming the way wet clay forms when you set your hands to it. He knew the problem of stories like this. They make heroes or fools of people, saints or monsters of animals. They edit out the pauses. He decided suddenly and with a clarity that surprised him that he would not allow the next hours to be written that way. If anyone asked, he would say, "A man walked into a lion's territory." A lion noticed. Both remembered something, though neither could have told you precisely what. Then they went on with their day. If that disappointed anyone, perhaps it would be the right kind of disappointment. At camp, the air was an oven under the reed thatch. The manager came out with his hat already in his hand, and Jonah told him what they had seen. Naledi added the details that matter to people like them. The old paw injury not impeding stride, no ticks clustered in the ears suggesting anemia, no staining at the eyes. Kojo reported the distance exactly, and Jonah nodded, surprised and grateful for the precision. Someone brought maize porridge and tea. They sat at the rough wooden table, and the world beyond the shade hummed like electricity. Later, when the heat let go of the day, Jonah walked alone to the fence line and stood where he could see the ridge they had left. He did not expect the lion to be there. He stood anyway. The wind carried a smell of rain from a storm he could not see. He thought of the years, the distance packed with papers and conferences and the steady parade of students eager to do noble things, the rent to pay, the way he had learned to fix his own leaky sink and to cook food better than beans. He thought of Makombo, who had learned his own things, where the cool lantana thickets held water when the pans had dried, which direction to peel away when a rival approached so that he would keep an escape route open, how to read the world's air for what mattered. From somewhere near the river, a lion called. It was not a roar meant to advertise strength. It was the long, rolling statement males make to tell other males what piece of map they mean to hold. It came once, twice, then again. The sound ran through Jonah and into the ground. He could feel it in the soles of his feet the way you feel the train before you see it. He did not know if it was Mukombo. He did not need the fact as much as he had in the morning. What mattered was simpler and harder. The recognition that their lives had briefly overlapped again, and that, in the meeting, each had kept to what he was. The night slipped up. Someone in camp told a joke that made the cooks laugh. A bat stitched the air with its soft, frantic wing beats. Jonah stayed where he was until the dark was the kind that asks you to count your steps back to the lantern and not look too hard at the shapes between. He took those steps, counted, and when he reached the light, the world narrowed to the circle it made. He slept badly and without dreams. In the green pre-dawn, Naledi knocked on his door frame. "We'll go again," she said. "No more explanation than that." He nodded and rolled to his feet. By the time the sun cleared the low line of the trees, the truck was parked where it had been the day before. The prints on the ridge were overprinted by others, some very small. The old male had ranged in the night, as males do when they sing their boundaries to the dark. Naledi looked at Jonah. He looked back. There was no plan beyond this. To walk again. To see, to be correct with the land and with themselves. He tightened his bootlaces and checked his water bottle. When they stepped into the grass, it spoke in that whisper that had greeted him the morning before, and Jonah found that the sound no longer made his heart kick like a trapped thing. It sounded, instead, like a welcome back to a conversation paused, not ended. He went forward. The hide smelled of dust and canvas and human sweat already absorbed into the seams. It wasn't elegant, but it gave them a space to watch without pressing closer. Jonah lay on his stomach with his elbows dug into the ground, binoculars propped against his brow, and watched the lion across the clearing. Mukombo, or the lion that had all of Mukombo's marks, shifted his weight every so often, tail flicking in long, lazy arcs. A younger version of Jonah might have filled the silence with notes, but now he let it sit. It was enough to watch. At first, the lion gave them nothing more than the indifference of a king with his business elsewhere. But the day wore on, and with the afternoon wind, a small troop of baboons drifted into view. They foraged, oblivious, until one juvenile saw the mane in the grass and screeched. The whole troop bolted, branches cracking as they scrambled up the nearest knob thorns. Mukombo lifted his head, watched them scatter, and then lay back down without rising. It was not hunger time. It was simply proof that he still commanded. Jonah felt a thin current move through him. This was the lion he remembered, not in body, because time had thickened that body into something more deliberate, but in the rhythm of his choices. Mukombo had always been measured, even as a cub. He had spent more time watching than pouncing in those early days of rehabilitation. Most cubs rushed at anything that moved. Mukombo had been different, and here he was, older but cut from the same cloth of patience. "Not many males his age hold territory alone," Naledi murmured from behind him. "You know that. He's either smart, very lucky, or both." "Smart," Jonah said. "Luck doesn't last this long." Kojo said nothing. He didn't like attributing qualities like intelligence to animals. Clever was as far as he went, but Jonah couldn't help himself. He had seen those eyes look at him once and measure him, the way they did now. When dusk settled, the lion rose. The light caught the mane, turning it into a bronze halo that didn't belong to any saint, only to muscle and bone and the rough music of survival. Jonah felt something tug hard at his chest when Mukombo stretched, jaws open wide enough to show the dark ridges of his palate. That yawn was a beginning, not an end. Lions move at night. And if you want to know a lion, you follow then. Naledi had prepared for this. "We'll go by vehicle," she said. "On foot, you'll learn nothing but how to panic in the dark." They drove with headlights dimmed, keeping distance. Every so often, The lion would pause, ears swiveling, but he did not change his pace. He moved through his valley as though he carried a charter signed by the land itself. Jonah watched him, scent mark bushes, scrape soil, stop and roar once, a deep thunder that spilled into the night and came back to them through the rattling windows of the land cruiser. The call drew an answer far away, faint but present. Another male. The exchange went back and forth. Jonah counted intervals, the way Naledi had earlier, 2 males on the edge of hearing, announcing boundaries. Makombo's voice was deeper, older, Jonah thought, but also more settled, a baritone that seemed to come from the ground as much as from his chest. The younger male, wherever he was, would think twice before closing the distance. They lost him near the river, where the bush thickened and vehicles couldn't go without tearing tracks. Naledi parked and cut the engine. The night was a skin around them, stretched taut with insect whir and frog call. Jonah sat with the smell of water in his nose and let the sound of lions roll through him. He remembered another night, years ago, when the cub had been only months out of the boma. They'd tracked the radio collar until the signal vanished into static. Jonah had sat in camp with his notebook closed, too worried to sleep. Around midnight, the sound of a young lion's roar had drifted across the flats, thin, awkward, uncertain. But it had been enough. Jonah had written in his journal that night, "He has found his voice." Now that voice had become something else entirely, weathered and sure. The memory made Jonah's throat tighten. They returned to camp past midnight. Jonah barely spoke, and when Naledi asked if he wanted to try again at dawn, he only nodded. Sleep came in scraps, interrupted by the lingering echo of those roars. The next morning, they went on foot again, but more cautiously. Jonah carried no illusions now. The previous day had been chance wrapped in calm. Lions do not repeat themselves neatly. He reminded himself of this as they stepped into the grass, as the whisper of stems brushed his legs again. This time they found Makombo nearer to the ridge, lying with his head up. When Jonah appeared, the lion lifted himself to standing at once, tail swishing. Not aggressive, no charge, no flattened ears, but alert, attentive. Jonah froze where he was and let his breath slow. Naledi's hand hovered near her radio. The lion did something unexpected. He walked forward a few paces, then stopped. His gaze didn't waver. Jonah's heartbeat was a drum he couldn't quiet. He spoke, low, steady. "It's me. I'm here." The lion's mouth opened in that same strange half-call he'd made yesterday. The sound rolled across the ground, not a roar, not a growl, a contact call, soft but resonant, the kind lions use for pride mates. Jonah's breath caught. Naledi whispered, "He's remembering something, or at least he thinks you belong." Jonah couldn't answer. His throat had closed. He stood, and the lion stood, and the years between them seemed to fold. For a moment, Jonah thought of the day they had first opened the boma gate. The cub had walked into the grass without looking back. Jonah had told himself that was natural, that wildness does not thank us. But now, in this fragile space between man and lion, he wondered if departure had not meant forgetfulness after all. The lion turned sideways, showing his full body, not directly challenging, but not dismissing either. He took a long time lowering himself back to the ground. Jonah realized the gesture was as much performance as rest. "I allow this space to exist between us. You may stay in it." For the next hour, they remained like that. 3 humans at a respectful distance, 1 lion sprawled in the grass. Every so often he flicked an ear, swatted at flies, rolled onto his side. Once he looked straight at Jonah again, eyes heavy but sharp, as if weighing memory against present fact. Jonah felt seen, not as an intruder, not quite as an ally, but as a variable accounted for. When the sun rose high, the lion dozed. Naledi touched Jonah's arm. "We should leave him now, before he decides the equation has changed." Jonah nodded. His chest felt full, not with triumph, but with something quieter, like a circle being closed not by design, but by persistence. He turned once before leaving, and Macombo's tail flicked, a small acknowledgement or maybe coincidence. Either way, Jonah took it. Back in camp, the story spread. Guides asked for details. The manager wanted to know if they could market the return of the old male, perhaps name a photo safari package after him. Jonah bristled. He said no, this wasn't a spectacle. Naledi backed him. "The lion isn't a story for tourists," she told the manager. "He's busy living his own." That night, Jonah walked alone again to the fence. He listened to the calls from across the river, the dialogue of males staking claims. He tried to imagine what the lion remembered, if memory was even the right word. Scent and sound last longer than faces. Did Macombo know Jonah as the boy with the bottle of milk, the one who smelled of antiseptic and sweat? Or was Jonah only another shape in a life full of shifting shapes? The truth, Jonah realized, didn't matter. What mattered was the chance to stand in that valley again, to see an animal who had survived snares, rivals, and time, and to know he had a place still. Jonah had returned not for closure, but for proof that survival itself was a kind of miracle. As the wind carried another roar across the dark, Jonah felt the story write itself, not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind a man carries quietly for the rest of his life. The days that followed moved in the slow rhythm of the savanna. Sunrise, heat, the exhale of evening. Jonah stayed longer than he had planned, his departure postponed by the pull of unfinished business. Each morning he found himself walking toward the ridge again, as though the ground itself drew his boots back. Naledi tolerated it with the patience of someone who knew that certain reckonings cannot be hurried, while Kojo complained only once, muttering about wasting fuel, then fell silent when the lion's presence became undeniable. Macombo did not disappear. He held to that valley as if it had been carved for him alone. They found him 3 days in a row within the same sweep of termite mounds and acacia shadows, sometimes closer to the river, sometimes higher on the slope. Each time, the encounter repeated in variations. Never violent, never tame. The lion would lift his head, take in their scent, and either settle back into the grass or stand to show his breadth. Jonah read each gesture as a kind of negotiation. You are here, I am here. We remember enough to share this space a little longer. By the 4th morning, Jonah stopped narrating his observations aloud. He realized he was no longer collecting data, but simply keeping company. His notebook remained in his pack. What mattered was presence. He would sit in the hide, knees cramped, eyes aching from the glass, and feel an odd peace. The lion hunted one night. They saw the drag marks of an impala the next morning, and Jonah was oddly relieved. It meant Macombo was still providing for himself, still strong enough to write his life without interference. One evening, a storm rolled in from the east. The air grew heavy, the horizon bruised with purple cloud. Naledi suggested they pack early, but Jonah asked to stay a while longer. They sat in the hide as the first drops tapped the canvas, watching Macombo rise and scent the wind. Lightning split the sky, and for a moment the lion's mane blazed white. He roared once, not to rivals this time, but into the storm itself, as though telling the land he had no intention of moving. Jonah felt the sound vibrate through his ribs. It was not defiance, not fear, just declaration. Back at camp, the rain drummed the roofs until the night was thick with water. Jonah lay awake, listening. He thought of the years he had spent away, classrooms filled with bright young faces, the routine of marking essays, the polite applause after lectures. None of it had prepared him for the simplicity of this, a man and a lion, still alive in the same valley. The next morning, Naledi found him sitting with coffee gone cold. You'll have to leave soon, she said gently. Flights don't wait forever. I know, Jonah admitted. He stared into the cup. But leaving feels unfinished. Of course it does, she said. That's the way of it. Nothing out here finishes neatly. Jonah smiled faintly. He knew she was right. He knew, yet some part of him wanted a sign, some gesture from the lion to close the loop. It was a foolish desire. Wild animals do not grant us resolutions, but he carried it anyway. That afternoon, they drove once more to the ridge. The valley shimmered in the heat. At first, they saw nothing. The mounds were empty, the grass unmarked. Jonah's heart sank. Perhaps the lion had moved on in the night, chasing scent trails beyond the river. Perhaps this brief reunion was already over. Then Naledi pointed. There! Half hidden in shade, Makombo lay stretched on his side, ribs rising slow and steady. They parked the vehicle at distance. Jonah felt an urge, irrational, undeniable, to step out one last time on foot. Naledi hesitated, then gave a small nod. No closer than yesterday, she warned. Jonah walked alone, leaving the others at the vehicle. The grass hissed around him. He kept his steps deliberate, shoulders square, voice low. I'm here, he murmured. Just here. The lion lifted his head. For a moment, the years seemed to dissolve, and Jonah saw the cub again, the awkward gait, the watchful eyes. Then the present returned, heavier and older. Makombo rose to his feet, stretched, and walked a few paces toward him. Jonah froze. The distance between them shrank to perhaps 20 meters. The lion stopped. He stood, chest broad, mane tangled with burrs, his eyes fixed on Jonah with that deep, unreadable steadiness. The air smelled of dust and old rain. Jonah felt his pulse hammer, but he did not step back. He only breathed. What happened next was not dramatic. Makombo gave a low rumble, softer than a growl, deeper than a purr, a sound lions use when greeting or when deciding something is safe enough. Then, with a swish of his tail, he turned. He walked away, not in haste, not in fear, but with the calm of an animal certain of his place. He did not look back. Jonah stood rooted, every nerve alive. He knew better than to chase the moment for more. This was the sign he hadn't dared hope for. Not affection, not recognition in the human sense, but allowance. The lion had given him space, had chosen not to push him out. In the wild, that was as close to grace as one could ask. When Jonah returned to the vehicle, Naledi studied his face and said nothing. Kojo only muttered, "You're lucky, Professor." "Not luck," Jonah whispered. "Just time." That night, his last in camp, Jonah sat by the fire. The stars came out sharp and innumerable. He thought of the cub in the boma, of the young researcher he had been, of the long years between. He thought of how survival is not glamorous but stubborn, built from quiet decisions made day after day. He realized that what surprised him most was not the lion's reaction, but his own. He no longer needed to prove anything. The meeting had been enough. At dawn, Naledi drove him to the airstrip. The grass shimmered gold in the early light. As the small plane warmed its engine, Jonah turned once more toward the ridge. The valley lay empty from this distance, but he imagined the lion still there, padding through grass, roaring at rivals, carrying his years with unbent dignity. Jonah climbed aboard. As the plane lifted, the land spread beneath him. Rivers, acacia dots, the long ribbon of savanna. Somewhere down there, Makombo lived on. The thought settled in Jonah not as sorrow, but as a quiet, steady gift. He did not wave, did not whisper farewell. Some connections do not need words. They simply remain, as enduring as the land itself.